Shimon HaTemani Omer Af Al Hadever. So it's about 10 lines down in the wide lines. So we dealt with the issue about things that you do even on Shabbat, matri'in, you sound the alarm. I saw some, but that, or you do the special tefillot. And we saw the interesting position of Rabbi Yossi that said better pay attention to the practical concerns and calling people for help rather than these tefillot. And that interestingly might have also tied into the question about whether an individual can fast. The issue of the individual fasting, again, as I said yesterday, makes most sense that it should have been a question on Shabbat. But again, whatever it is, Rabbi Yossi is saying, let's not worry about fasting. Let's worry about taking care of where the real needs lie. Okay, then we go on to the next line in the Mishnah, which is Shimon HaTeimani. So again, to remind us what Shimon HaTeimani said in the Mishnah is, that was from the end of the Breita, where we had, where was it? 1 minute. Omer Af Al Hadever. Oh yes, I'm sorry. It was in the Mishnah. So the Mishnah had the list of the things that you can do, that you sound the alarm, or that you do the prayers on Shabbat, even on Shabbat, and those were things that were seen as like urgent and imminent. And Shimon HaTeimani said even on the pestilence, v'lo hodu lo chachamim. So the Gemara says the following: Ibailu lo hodu lo chachamim b'Shabbat, which is the context. So on Shabbos, Dever is not seen again. I don't know, Dever to me, if it's some type of a form of a viral disease or bacterial disease, plague, pestilence, and so on, it would seem that it is pretty much as imminent as these other things. But okay, maybe they didn't feel that way. Maybe it was something else. And therefore we're talking that you don't do it on Shabbat. But on a weekday, of course, we had all the stories before about how they saw, Dever in one place and they made even, a Taanit in a different place because of, how it would travel with the caravans and so on. So of course, in a weekday is something to make a ta'anit and to make special tefillot. Or maybe this is a position that in general we don't see it as being an area of concern, which would be pretty funny. So Tashma coming here. You are matri'in, again, you do the special tefillot on Dever on Shabbat, and it goes without saying in the weekday. Reb Chanan ben Pitom, Talmido Rabbi Akiva, Mishum Rabbi Akiva, Omer, this Reb Chanan ben Pitom says, in the name of Rabbi Akiva, you never do the truah on the dever, so I really do not understand what this logic would be. But there is that position that you don't do it at all, and the Gemara is somehow assuming that presumably is Shimon HaTeimani, because presumably that's the Chachamim who argue on Shimon HaTeimani. Again, a very strange position, no explanation for it against the earlier Gemara that we saw that dever was one of those traveling things. So even if you don't do it in the whole world, you certainly do it in nearby places or places that there's travel between. But here seemingly putting out a position, you don't do it on Dever at all. All right. Then the Mishnah continues and says, on any bad thing that, God forbid should not happen, that's like a sort of a euphemistic statement. It could be read on anything that's about to happen and we're trying to prevent it from happening, but by context it really means on any bad things, and then like poo in parentheses, God forbid it shouldn't happen, we make a, we are matri'in, we do these special tefillot, except, the Mishnah said, except from too much rain. And that then allowed for the transition into the story of Choni HaMe'agel, which is the story of too much rain. And basically, as we get to the next daf, Choni HaMe'agel's stories, multiple stories of Choni HaMe'agel, is really going to be the entire daf today. Okay, so let's take a look. Tana Rabbanan, our rabbis taught. On any bad thing that chas v'shalom shouldn't happen, matri'ina leha, you would again, it means either being blast to sound the alarm or a special tefillot. Chutz me'rov geshamim, except for too much rain. You never complain. You don't complain for too much good, even if the too much good is not working out for you right now. My time. What's the reason? Amar Rav Yochanan lefi shein mitpali marov hatovah. Okay, which is a little bit of a tautology. You don't pray for not having too much good, but making it more general point. It's not specific to rain. Presumably, the point being that even though right now, too much of it is not a good thing, there's something that is seen as a little of a certain amount of either like ingratitude or in the fact that this thing is fun. Well, let's see how that develops. What exactly is the problem about Mipalim al Rov Tova? So if I'm Rabbi Yochanan, I came Mipalim al Rov Tova. Where do you get this idea that you don't pray for too much of a good thing? Shne'emar, the verse says, bring all of your tithes to the treasure house, to the storehouse, and it says, I will open up for you the warehouses of heaven, or the skylights of heaven, to pour down rain or to pour down grain, ad b'lidai, until there's not enough or without sufficient. So what does it mean? My ad b'lidai. So Amar Rami bar Rav Yud, some say his name was actually Yud, said Rami, the son of Rav Yud, or son of Rav, ad sheyivlu sifsotechem milomer dai, until your lips get weary of saying enough, enough, enough. So there's so much that you'll grow weary of saying, like, stop, it's enough already. Now, I got to tell you, I don't understand how that's a proof. If you're saying enough, 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 then you're saying, you stop. You're asking God, it's enough. I don't want any more. But maybe there's a difference between saying it's enough and saying, please stop it. So you keep on saying enough, but God keeps on doing the good thing. And but again, not exactly clear what this is proving, because it seems like you are saying enough. Amar Rami bar Rav Yud. Anybody who has any insight, happy to hear it. Says Rami bar Rav Yud, Ubegola. Now this contrast will help us maybe a little bit understand some of what the problem is. In exile, meaning in Bavel, where we've learned before that Bavel had very much less need of rain, had a lot of wetlands. So in Bavel, matu'ina leha. Then actually you would sound the, do the special prayers, pray against, if it was raining too much. Tanya Namihachi, we taught similarly, Shana Shikishameha Merubim, a year that is very rainy, has a lot of rain. Anshe Mishmar Shochim Anshe Ma'amad, the people of the Mishmar, the Kohanim, sent to the people of the Ma'amad, which were the representatives of the Jewish people, when the Korbanot were being brought, and from Israel, not from the Kohanim, and they were supposed to be obviously also thinking, and they had special prayers, and they were supposed to, again, be representing the Jewish people, so thinking about the welfare of the larger Jewish people in their prayers. So they would send to them, give your eyes, which give thought to, presumably in your prayers, your brethren in the Golah, in the exile, shelo yihi batehem kivrehem. People will note that phrase that we say in the Tefillot in Yom Kippur by the end of the prayers of the Kohen Gadol. But it's raining so much that their houses could flood. So you should pray that their houses shouldn't flood. So therefore, it could be a real danger. Okay? So the question is, why is it allowed to pray for this in Golah and not allowed to pray in Eretz Yisrael? So one issue could just be that it's a greater danger. It's such a danger. Okay, Eretz Yisrael, too much rain isn't a great thing, but it's not a huge danger. And generally, it's something that you very much want. And when there's that degree of a danger, that overrides other types of concerns. But it could also be that the flip side of it is not just the degree of danger, but how much during a normal year is this seen as something that is like so necessary, so direly necessary, because there's some type, and this in a way is like the Choni story. To me, it seems that some of the problem the Gemara is grappling with is like, okay, last year there was a lot of rain and you complained, and now you're just saying, oh my God, we need rain. Even though obviously there's a logic that sometimes things you need, the right amount, not too much and not too little, but it somewhat maybe a little bit undercuts the dire sense of the request. If in the past you've also been asking, or there was a time when you said, actually, no, there's too much, we don't want it. So in Gola, where there's never a dire need of rain, there's not so much of a problem to say, like, if it's too much or if it's too little, because, sort of the great urgency and the dire sort of need for it in Eretz Yisrael doesn't allow you at any other time to say it's too much. To ever say it's too much of it would sort of undermine how critical it is all the other times. To me, I have a sense that's what's going on in the Gemara about Ein Mitpalim al Rov Tova. But again, I'm open for other thoughts, because the Gemara does not really sort of, explicate this. Again, Rabbi Yochanan makes it a more general statement. He doesn't make it just about rain. He says, like, you don't ever pray against too much good of anything. So anything that's like too much of it, you don't pray, you don't pray about. And again, it's interesting because sometimes, the quantity, there is a problem with too much. So I don't know. Shaul Rabbi Eliezer, they asked Rabbi Eliezer, on Heichen Gishamim Yordim, to when V'yitpalalu. And again, this really will drive the story home. Shelo Yerdu. So it says, okay, let's not talk about Babel. Let's talk about Eretz Yisrael. At what stage is it really raining too much that it would be appropriate to say, God, please don't give us any more rain? So Amar Lahem, he said to them, Kidesh Yamod Adam B'Keren Afel, a person should stand on this rock called Keren Afel, the dark corner, but it's a specific rock that we're going to see is extremely high up. Yeshachshech Raglav B'Mayim, and the water should have risen to such a high level that he could dip his toes in the water. So basically you've got this outcropping, which is, 100 feet off the ground, and it has to be that the water, as it rains so much, is that the water reaches his feet, which basically means you would need 100 feet of water before you would say it, which means never. You never pray for too much rain. So Vatanya, we turn a brisa Yadav Yadav, so as if this makes a difference here, until he sticks his hand in the water, not his feet in the water. Yadav, so the Gemara says Raglav ki Yadav coming. Okay, his feet like his hands, which whatever that means, his feet and his hands, his feet to the same way. Doesn't matter anyway. Its basic point is, you would never do it. I'm a Rabbi Barbachana. I saw this outcropping. The Kamahutaya Kish Rechiva Gamla, and that presumably it means somebody. I was standing on this outcropping, and I saw a certain nomad who was or Arab who was riding with a camel, v'nakit rumcha biyadei, and he had a spear in his hand, so he's very high, right? He's on a camel holding up a spear, and mitchazi iniva, and he looked like a little ant. So this is so high up that I was able to look down and see somebody below, even on top of a camel with a spear, and it looked like he looked like a tiny ant. So this is a very high outcropping. Okay, so again, it's very strange. Even if literally in Israel it was flooding, there was feet and feet and feet of rain, you still would not be mitpalel because rain is intrinsically a good thing. So again, I'm a little struggling with the logic behind this, other than, as I said, the point that since most years it's something that there's a real scarcity of, and there's a very dire need, you don't want to be seen as like a kafui tova, like you're saying, oh well, there's too much of this. Yeah, that's the way you feel. Then why should you be getting the other times as well? But again, more than that, I'm trying to sort of find a good explanation for this. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught. I will give the reins in their right time. So what's be'itam? So this is quite interesting if you compare this to what we just said. Lo shechura, not literally drunk, meaning not too much rain. Lo tzme'ah, not thirsty, not too little. Ela beinonit, a medium amount of rain. Shekozman shegishamim merubim, because if there's too much rain, the tashtashines aretz, it's like it ruins the land. Things get muddy and it won't help for the crops too much either. So here you basically have a brayta that explicitly says that promise of gishmechem pitam is explicitly pointing out that you need the right amount, not too much and not too little. So again, holding that up in contrast to the point, but we don't pray if they're against to withhold too much. Is quite interesting. Okay, the enamutzia peirot, and when the ground is flooded and muddy, it will not grow fruit. Davar acher, so another meaning. So that be'itam did not really mean their time. That really meant the right amount. Now we're going to deal with the issue of their time, and this is one explanation that a lot of people know because Rashi says it on the Chumash. B'leilei revi'iotu b'leilei Shabbatot. On Tuesday nights, meaning the night before Wednesday, Revi'it b'Shabbat, and Friday nights. Because people don't leave their houses. People don't leave their houses Friday night because, often during the week, you'd be out in the field working till it grew dark, and then you'd come home when it was already dark, right? So you'd be traveling in the night. You'd be getting home from work. But on Shabbos, you're already home. You got to get home before it gets dark. So on Shabbos, when it's dark, you're already at home and eating your meal. And on Tuesday nights, there was a belief that there was a certain type of evil spirit that would cause, illness if you would that would travel out at night on Tuesday nights, on the night leading into Wednesday. So people tended not to travel on Tuesday nights. So people were at home, and that was a perfect time. Okay? So now, again, I have to say that this is funny because that seems to be okay, it's a bracha, so a bracha could be over the top, but it seems to be it's enough that there's enough rain and there's the rain at the right time and the rain that I needed. It doesn't have to exactly correspond to the fact that I'm not going to get wet when I go outside. Now I feel that whenever we complain, like, oh, I'm getting so wet in the rain, we're being very pampered Americans. Like, we don't even appreciate how necessary the rain is. All we care about is that we don't get wet. So it's a little bit funny that that's sort of the point that's being made here. On the one hand, okay, it's a bracha. Bracha could be even like over the top. But again, talking about the idea of not being mitpalel for things, even for Rov Tovah, I think it's a little bit it's interesting, this type of a concern. Okay, Shekein Matzinu, now the Braita goes on and saying, don't think that if it only rains, 2 nights a week, you'll be concerned that won't be sufficient, or don't think that that's not rain of bracha. Shekein Matzinu b'yemei Shimon ben Shetach, we found in the days of Shimon ben Shetach, Yerdu lem Geshamim b'leilei Reviot u'b'leilei Shabbatot, and that it fell on Tuesday nights and Friday nights, Ad shenasu chitim klayot, until the grains of wheat were like kidneys. They were that big. Usarim kigarine zaitim, and barley, the barley grains were as big as the stones of olives. Va'adashim, and the lentils kidinare zahav, were as big as gold dinare. So they were huge. The crops grew at a huge amount. So Rashi says is coming to try to tell you that even raining 2 nights a week is enough. Based on what we've seen so far, it didn't seem to me like you could expect 2 nights, like 2 nights a week would be a lot in terms of frequency. It seems more that the point is that when it rains, specifically at this time, that is a siman bracha. And remember, this goes back to a theme from the very beginning of the Masechet, not just the need of rain, but rain as a symbol or as a manifestation of, God's relationship with the people. So if it's raining on Tuesday night and Friday night, it's a siman bracha, and I'll prove it to you, because that's exactly what happened in the time of Shimon ben Shetach, and look how much it blessed the crops, and look how much this was truly a bracha from God. Okay, but Sararu mehem dugmalu dorot, they bound up, sort of like the thing with like the man, they bound up this, or they carved, maybe, Rashi says they bound up, carved would be vitsaru probably, vitsaru, anyway, they bound this up as a model for future generations, Lodia kama hachet gorem, to know that in other years the reason things don't grow this much is because of the sin. Look, when everybody is righteous and doing the right thing, look how blessed you could be. Look how big these things grew. Sort of like the Meraglim coming back. Okay, but that wasn't a different context. But the idea here of this is held up for future generations. Shenamar, as the verse says, Avonotechem hitu eila, it's your sins that have caused these things to go away. The earlier pasuk in Yirmiyahu talks about God bringing the rain in all of its right time, so it's very much in the context of rain. V'chatatechem manu hatov, and your sins held back the good. Mikem. V'chei matzinu b'bei Hordis, and we found similarly in the time of Hordis, who himself wasn't a big tzaddik, but at least he was rebuilding the Beis Hamikdash. Shayu oskim b'vinyan Beis Hamikdash, and everybody else was building the Beis Hamikdash. V'hayu yordim geshamim b'layla, and the rain would come down at night when people were at home. The machar nashva haruach v'nitpazu ha'avim, and the next morning the wind would come, the clouds would scatter. It would be a gorgeous day the next morning after a heavy rain. V'zarcha ha'chama, the sun would shine. V'yatzu amlim lachdan, and everybody would go out and be perfect, nice and sunny when you wake up, and cool and no humidity, and all the rain comes at night. And especially if your work is building the Beis Hamikdash, and they knew that it was that the labor of God was in their hands. That what they were doing was godly work, and because the whole weather, the whole environment reflected the righteousness and of what they were doing. So clearly here, what we're moving back to is not just like, okay, it's convenient, but the fact that God is going out of the way, to make it so convenient is, again, this the importance of this siman bracha, of this way in which God shows. And then again, that's reflected, in the fact that it's beautifully sunny the next day, or it's reflected in the fact that you have all these, the huge produce that come out. But again, the significance being about again, this issue of the siman bracha versus the siman klala. You wanted to say something, David? Yeah.
So good point. First, rain at night affects large-scale construction projects, I can tell you from experience.
Okay. So it's not just an issue of convenience. Okay. You're saying it's the opposite, that if you're trying to do the construction at night so that it doesn't, the opposite?
When you get there in the morning and your place is flooded, it's not so good. So these guys weren't building.
Okay, fine.
The second point is your comment about we Americans today on July 4th.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
Maybe
Happy
there are two
birthday.
things going on here in the Gemara.
Yes,
One is about efficacy of prayer and saying when you do certain things in
Right.
order to impact the nature of the rain. And the second is about communal leadership.
hmm
And maybe these comments about not calling out and complaining or
Right.
praying for the stopping of too much rain
right.
is really not about the need for prayer in that circumstance, but the impact on the community. That if as you've said continually,
hmm
that there is a tenuous nature of the water cycle in Eretz Israel, and
hmm
that we have to see ourselves as vulnerable and dependent upon God.
hmm
That if you were to say to the community, come forward, and when there's too much rain, you should cry out to God and ask Him to stop it.
Right.
It's more like we have some ability to dial it up and dial it down.
hmm
In fact, the public perception that you're trying to encourage here, or the rabbis are trying to encourage here, is one of dependence on God.
Mm.
And so maybe those are
Interesting.
two different things. That they're doing.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. It's an interesting thought. Where I also thought you were going with it is that if you want to look at the rain as like God's ratzon, because God is bringing down the rain, so if you want to have the rain to have its sort of symbolic power, then when you start complaining about too much, it also undermines the symbolism of the rain. Right? Because if you sort of relate to rain, absence of rain means God isn't connecting to us. Presence of rain means God is bringing down God's blessing. And then you actually start praying, it shouldn't rain so much. So while in practical terms it's not helpful right now, but it also undermines the symbolism of the rain.
If you want to go there, it's reminiscent of Bnei Yisrael and Midbar.
Yeah, about the complaining about
telling Moshe, you get over there. It's we don't want this.
Exactly. Right, something like that. Exactly. So I do think that that's so that maybe Dafka does help explain this also this connection here, because here it is little bit more fine tuned. Right here, the point is that the symbol of the bracha is not just the presence of the rain, but like exactly the way the rain is falling. Okay, so now we go. Finally, we transition to what, at least in my mind, has been a dominant sort of image throughout this parak, but now we actually finally turning to it, which is the Choni HaMe'agel. So let's take a look. Ma'aseh sheshalchu l'Choni HaMe'agel, so the whole story with Choni HaMe'agel, which was too much rain. But of course, their Choni did complain for too much rain. So it's interesting that the halacha then becomes against that. And always the question is, how much are the rabbis embracing or rejecting Choni? I will also have you note and put in your file away that it's Shimon ben Shetach, which we said was so perfect, the way it was raining, exactly the right time, and so on. Shimon ben Shetach is going to come up again here. So and we're going to see that the story of Choni HaMe'agel came during the time of Shimon ben Shetach, where we read just a minute ago that Bimei Shimon ben Shetach, it sounds like there was an ongoing thing in Shimon ben Shetach's time about how perfect everything was in terms of their deeds and in terms of the rain. So let's take a look.
What was Shimon ben Shetach's connection to the development of the liturgy? I think, wasn't he connected to...
Was that Shimon ben Shetach? I don't remember that was Shimon ben Shetach. You can check that. Taner Banan. Pamachas yatsa rov Adar. One time, most of Adar had already gone out. It was the second half of Adar. Below Yardu Geshamim, it still hadn't rained. One wonder. I mean, it's getting pretty dire, right? Because normally it's supposed to rain, Cheshvan, Kislev, Tevet. I mean, we're really talking about like one's beginning to wonder how good the rain is even going to do at this point. Once it gets to Nisan, we say it doesn't do any good. Shalchu l'Choni HaMe'agel. They sent to Choni the circle drawer. He palu v'yardu geshamim. Pray and the rain should come down. He palev lo yardu geshamim. He prayed, it didn't work. Aguga. So that wasn't working. Simple prayer. So he had to get into something more drastic. He made a circle. V'amad b'tochan, stood in the middle. Kidel shasa Chabakuk hanavi, like Chabakuk did. Shenemar al mishmarti e'emoda. I will stand by my watch. Ve'et yatzva al matzor. I will stand by the matzor. The literally means like the tower, but here it's probably a play on the word of tzura, of making an image, like to stand on the things that I have drawn. Amar lefanav, and now back to Choni. Choni said to God, Ribbono shel olam, Master of the universe, they've turned towards me. Shani ben bait lefanecha, I am like a member of your household. Nishbani b'shimcha gadol, I take an oath in your great name. She'eni zaz mikan, I will not move from here until you have compassion on your children. So basically, he's now gone from prayer and request to essentially like ultimatum and threat. So the rain started like dripping. So Amrlo Talmidav, his student said to him, Rabbi, our master, Ra'inucha v'lo namut. Now that's a very strange phrase, what that means. We have seen you and we won't die. What does that mean? So Rashi says it means like we are looking to you that we should not die. We are looking to you to save us with your prayers. But I'll go back to that in a minute. Let's read it like that for now. What?
In other words, we need more rain.
We need more rain. We are looking to you to save us, that we shouldn't die. And now here's the next line. And it appears to us that it's not being effective, that God is only causing it to rain in order to deal with your ultimatum. But he's not really and giving you the rain that we need. So Choni presumably turned back to God and said, Lo kach sha'alti, that wasn't what I asked for. Ela gishmei barosh yichinu me'arot, rain to fill the wells. Yardu b'zaf. They came down in like anger, like, torrents. Every drop of rain would be enough to fill the opening of a barrel. And there was no drop of rain that they estimated that was less than the size of a loaf, which is about 12 ounces. So those are pretty big drops of rain. The student said to him, Rabbi, our master, again, we have seen you and that we should not die. It seems now that the rain is coming to destroy the world. He said, so Choni went back and said to God, that wasn't what I asked for. Rain of blessing, of kindness, of goodness. They came down in the right way. But then they didn't stop. They kept on coming and coming and coming. Until the whole everybody had to go to the Temple Mount to escape the flooding. Amrulo, they said to him, Rabbi, now it's quite interesting that the students are always the ones that have to be reporting these issues, right? So is it because in the first place it says that it didn't rain and then he made the circle? He was able to judge whether his prayer was effective or not. So, why wasn't he making the judgment here? Was it that he felt, okay, I did my job, it's raining, and his students had to push it back? Or maybe, since he's not like he's stepping out of the circle, it also means like even if you're in a circle, if you're not indoors, we imagine he was outdoors, whatever, we imagine you could still tell, is it torrents, is it drips? Why the students have to report it? But it could also be trying to suggest, people try to figure out what exactly is going on here with this circle. Was there some idea of magic going on or some concern about that? Maybe was he like oblivious in that circle in some psychological way, or just, in some type of trance that he was oblivious to what was going on around him. What?
Maybe also he's not taking the initiative. He's
completely responding.
Requests.
Exactly.
So
that's an excellent point, right? It always starts by responding to requests.
I rebalance the idea you're having about his arrogance. In the sense of like, he's doing this because people are asking him to. Right.
The one thing though he does respond to is as soon as it did not rain, he says aguga. So he responded going from prayer didn't work. Now he realizes it's not a problem and he drew the circle. Once he's in the circle, constantly he's responding to what people are saying to him. So okay. The same way you praise that they should come, pray that they should go away. So here's the issue of Rov Tovah. The rain itself is a beautiful rain. It's just too much of it, right? So Amalahem, he said to them, so here he now quotes halacha or whatever halacha. It's something about prayer. No, you don't pray for too much goodness. Nevertheless, bring me a cow of thanksgiving, presumably like a shlamim. It's the time of the Beis Hamikdash, and he does happen to be on Har Bayis. They brought him a cow of thanksgiving, a bull, thank you, a bull. He put his two hands on it, and said to God, so notice, by the way, I think it's significant that it's hoda'ah, right? You don't complain about too much goodness. So you start by saying thank you is essentially what you're saying. He was complaining before, but at least now he's saying thank you. So he said, they can't deal with too much good or too much bad. Too much bad is obvious. By the way, that's what you say. The Breita in Yevamot says that you say to the prospective convert. So it's an interesting just parallel there. But anyway, notice that Choni is not saying that what you have given us is not good. Okay, God, what you've given us right now, at least, is all good. But unfortunately, the people don't know how to handle all of this goodness. When you were angry and you didn't give them the rain, they weren't able to just take the punishment. They had to come to me and ask for it to be reversed. That's an interesting idea, right? They should just accept their punishment and deal with it. Hishpat aleim tova, you have overflowed goodness to them. Einim yicholim la'amod, they cannot deal with it. So Yehi ratzon milfanecha, may it be thy will, sheyifsiku hageshamim v'yirevach ba'olam. So he's not sort of, once he acknowledges and does the parah hoda'ah that it is all good that we're getting from you, God, but unfortunately the people can't deal with it, then he's able to request, may it be thy will, not like he's demanding nowhere, not like you must do this. Yiratzon milfanecha, right? God, may you find it appropriate that it stops so that people can get back to normal. Miyad nashva, and maybe that also, by the way, is the important shift here, not just in this lesson of Rov Tovah, which he is sort of being a model for, not complaining about Rov Tovah, but maybe there's a lesson here of Choni, learning how to make the right type of a request, right? He goes from saying, God, that's not what I asked for, to saying, Yi ratzon milfanecha. God, you should find it appropriate to do the following thing. Okay, so there's that, and that's sort of the moment that everything goes back. So Yad Nashva Ruach V'Nitpazu Havim, the wind blew, the clouds scattered. V'Zarcha Hachama, the sun shone forth. V'Yatzam Lasadeh, they went out to the field. V'Hiviu Al Pnihimu Pitriyot, and they were able to bring all these wonderful fungi and mushrooms that came from all the rain, and it was and everything was wonderful. Now, obviously, it's interesting to compare this story to the story in the Mishnah, because in the story of the Mishnah, he didn't bring this cow, this ox. He did not, he did not say Yiratzon Milfanecha. You did not have this significant transition. In the Mishnah, what just happened was, after it was getting to be too much, he says, so they said to him, pray that they would go, and he said, he was unresponsive to them. He just said, I've had enough. Go and see if the rock that you make announcements from has completely dissolved, and and otherwise don't bother me. So there in the Mishnah he was unresponsive, which also could model Amy Palima Rov Tovah. He was refusing to pray about it, but here he's responsive, and not only is he responsive and helps bring a satisfactory conclusion, but he also shifts his way of talking to God, which I think is very significant. Okay, and I do want to again reiterate that I think that the point here about Amy Palima Rov Tovah is because, of the symbolism. The reality is that too much rain could be destructive. But if you see the symbolism as God's goodness, right, and that has the symbolic weight. Rain means God is giving us his goodness. God is bringing down the goodness to the world. Then to say we don't want it, even if practically it is hurting us, is saying we don't want, this God's goodness. So I think a lot of this has to, Einim Yicholim L'Kabel Lo Rov Tovah. So I think there's a lot about this has to do with, again, not just the practical impact, but the symbolic significance of it. Okay, so Shalach Lo Shimon ben Shetach. Now Shimon ben Shetach sent him. So here's Shimon ben Shetach. So remember, all of this was happening at a time when the Gemara earlier reported that it will always rain perfectly. So anyway, Shimon ben Shetach sent him, Il Mali Choni Ata, if it were not that you were Choni, goes Rani Alecha Nidui, I would decree upon you excommunication. He says, imagine the following. You made a shvuah that you're not moving until God brings rain. Let's say we happen to be living in the years of Eliyahu. And remember what happened by Eliyahu. Eliyahu said it's not going to rain unless I say so. So imagine you and Eliyahu were living at the same time. You had made an oath that God, you're not going to move until God brings the rain. And Eliyahu said that God is not going to bring the rain. And he made an oath that God won't bring the rain. So what's going to happen? Where were we? You're causing God's name to be desecrated, because either your shvuah will be violated or Eliyahu's shvuah will be violated. You can't basically bind God, Of course, the subtext is, but Eliyahu did the exact same thing in the opposite direction, right? So, but somehow he's saying, you cannot go ahead and try to force God's hand that way, and that could lead to something terrible. Also, one could imagine that the Nim says Shem Shemayim Mitchalal Yadecha. It's not just about the Eliyahu point, but about the forget Eliyahu. Right now, you're saying, God, you better do this. If it doesn't happen, what's going to be the larger religious impact on the people? You could say it means that maybe, you'll be discredited. But it doesn't always work that way. People could still believe that, you have the power, and, basically it feels like, and it leads to, a sense that, God isn't able to do this, or, it could lead to very bad impact on how people perceive not only you, but how people perceive God, if you try to make a public display of binding God's hand. What?
particularly if you're in a reward and punishment
mindset, right? Exactly. So people think that they're just such terrible sinners, right? Although that's not exactly the mitchal shem shemayim, but it is another consequence. So I think that that's part of the issue here. Like, what's the larger impact of these types of things? What can I do for you that you sort of misbehave before God, and God goes ahead and does your will? Like a child who's constantly misbehaves in front of his father. The father indulges him. And the son says, Abba, Daddy, go take me to bathe me, in hot water, now rinse me off with cold water. I want this toy and that toy and this candy bar. And he gives him, he indulges him. God indulges your misbehavior. Or you're overly demanding, of God. And regarding you, the verse says, your mother and father will rejoice over you. Interesting, introducing the idea of mother here in the context of God, but okay, I mean, not just mother, the feminine, but father and mother. Anyway, so God indulges you. Okay. So, Tanu Rabbanan, so a rabbi thought, finish reading the story, and then say a few more points about it. Obviously, there's a lot to unpack here. So Shimon ben Shetach basically had a complaint. He says, God tolerates you, but I'm not happy with the way you acted. But the Lishkas Hagazis, who are, the rabbis sitting in the Sanhedrin, here's where they sent what seems to be a much more positive, unequivocal, positive message. Here's what they sent. You decree, a statement, and God establishes it for you. That's the idea of tzaddik gozer v'kadosh baruch hu mekayem. You see those words. Vatigzer omer vayakim lach. Ve'al derchecha naga'ur, and on your pathway light has shone. Vatigzer omer atag zarta milamata v'kadosh baruch hu mekayem ha'marecha milamala. You say below, God does what you want above. Ve'al derchecha naga'ur, by your path light has shone. Dur shaya afel, a generation that was dark. Hey arta b'tfilatecha, you have brought light in your prayers. Ki shpilu v'tomar gava, because they have become lowly, and you have sort of given them haughtiness, or lifted them up. Dur shaya shafel, the generation that was lowly, bahato b'tfilatecha, you lifted up in your prayers. V'shach einayim yoshia, and the lowly eyes you will bring salvation. V'shach avano, the nation, the generation that was brought down in its iniquity, hosha'ata b'tfilatecha, you have brought salvation in your prayers. Yimaleit inaki, you will save the one who is unclean. The generation that was not clean because of its sins, you saved in your prayers. You have also saved through in the cleanliness of your hands. You saved it through the acts of your hands which were clear. Okay, so basically, thank you very much. We were in a great tragedy and you saved us. So first of all, that's fascinating, right? That there are those that just give him an unequivocal thank you, and when Shimon ben Shetach is basically complaining. Okay, the other, though, interesting thing is that, I'm going to just let me just read one more thing, and then I'll just make a few comments about that. Okay. No, actually, that is the end of that Choni HaMa'agel story, and then we're going to get to another one. So I'm just going to say a few very brief things, because I tried to do some research about what interesting things people had to say about Choni HaMa'agel. So first of all, one thing to know is already Choni HaMa'agel is mentioned in Josephus, and he references the fact that this person had great power in his prayer, and the people once prayed to him, and it brought down rain. And then he brings it into a whole story about the warring factions of the Beit Hashmonai, that they tried to draw him in one side to curse the other side, and he refused, and they basically killed him. So anyway, it's interesting, though, that there's already stories about that in Josephus. The issue about Ag Uga, and was this some type of profound, magical thing, and is his name Me'agel related to the Ag Uga? So people have shown that in some Midrashim, they talk about Ag Uga by others, like Moshe is said to have drawn a circle and say to God, I'm not going to move out of the circle unless you heal Miriam. So that this type of an idea, now maybe it was borrowed from Choni HaMa'agel, but it's a type of thing that they see other people doing, and even in our Gemara, it mentions Kiderech Sha'asa Chabakuk, right? Chabakuk did it. So it's sort of seems to be what it's trying to do is just sort of saying this is a way of sort of making a very forceful prayer to God, trying to not just demystify, I don't know if there's a word, demagicify it. It's not magic. Like Habakkuk did it, another story, Moshe did it. It's a way of just saying, God, I'm going to stand here till it gets done. Because that's part of the problem. Because people ask, what was this between him and Shimon ben Shetach? What was Shimon ben Shetach's larger problem? Was it just like, it says like, you talk disrespectfully to God? Was it the point I was trying to make, that making these types of binding God's hands, well, what will be the consequence if God doesn't listen to it? What's the larger religious impact on the people? You can't make it look like we as human beings can control God. But it could also be pointed out that Shimon ben Shetach had a particular campaign to wipe out witchcraft. And there's a story that he executed 80 witches in one day. There's stories about Shimon ben Shetach. So maybe there's a little bit of a concern here as well about does this seem to be a little type of a magic witchcrafty type of a thing with the circle and the trying to, because that's what witchcraft does, right? It sort of tries to force nature as opposed to prayer. Prayer, you say, God, please, and then God, as it were, decides whether to respond. Exactly. Whereas magic and witchcraft is trying to force nature to do because you've done the ritual, and that's exactly the shift that Choni does. First, he tries to force God, and then he moves to the Yehi Ratzon Milfanecha, which is like the classic prayer. So there are people that are concerned, maybe part of the issues going on here was witchcraft type of concerns, and maybe that was Shimon ben Shetach. Maybe that's why the Gemara is making a point of framing it that wasn't like what it was about, like it was like Habakkuk and so on. Anyway, but that's one possible theme. In terms of the word me'agel, people assume it means like an ego, a circle, but other scholars have pointed out that they're actually, the Mishnayot refer to a device that's used for plastering roofs called a me'agel. So I actually think that he was like a roof plasterer, which might mean why he was sensitive to the issues of rain. Of course, he wasn't so sensitive. They had to go to him. He didn't go to them. But anyway, it's an interesting discussion of me'agel. But the other thing about the ag uga, people also point out that there are Mishnayot that refer to an uga as a furrow that you make around a tree that collects the rain into the furrow, and slowly the water seeps in, and nurtures the roots. So that he's very similar. He's the tree in the middle. He's making the circle, and it's sort of about the need of being sustained by rain. So interesting about how some of that. But to me, the bigger question here, as I said, is this issue about more what's going on and how the rabbis are treating him. Is he a threat to the rabbis or not? You don't overwhelmingly get that sense. Shimon ben Shetach was upset, but then he got the counter push. But again, there's also the interesting question about maybe he's being tamed. Maybe in the original story he was more of a threat, but then the way the story is remembered, he sort of more brought in, to that sort of, to the rabbinic discourse type of a thing. But anyway, so that's the story of that. Obviously, if there was more time, we could say more about that. But now we're going to go on to another story of Choni HaMe'agel, and interesting to sort of also see if these two stories are related to one another or not. So let's take a look. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, said Rabbi Yochanan, Kol Yomav Shalosh Tzadik Hayim Mitzvah Mikrazeh. The whole life of this righteous person, he was concerned about the following verse. Shir Ma'alot B'Shuv Hashem Et Shivat Tziyun Hayinu K'Chomim. When God returned the exile, we were like the captivity, we were like dreamers. Mia Amar, so that was after 70 years that they were returned. How could they be like dreamers? Amar Mika Denayim Shivin Shnin. Does anybody dream for 70 years? So obviously it's not the meaning of the verse, but that's how he interpreted it. B'Chelma, in a dream. Who sleeps for 70 years in a dream? Yom Echad, one day he was going on the way. He saw a person planting a carob tree. How long is it going to take it to grow and to start bringing out fruit? It'll take 70 years. Do you think, is it obvious you'll live 70 years? Why are you bothering with this? He said to him, when this man, meaning me, when I was born, I found carob trees in the world. The same way my forefathers, the previous generations, my fathers, those that preceded me, planted trees that now I benefit from. I'm also going to plant a tree that my children will benefit from. Yosef, okay, very lovely answer. Yosef kakarich rifta. So Choni went down and he wrapped bread. Asalei shinsa, meaning he broke bread. He had a meal and he fell asleep. He took a little nap. Nim, he slept. Ahadrale mishunisa. So then a rock cropping came up around him. Ichsi me'ena, and he was hidden from view. V'nim shivin shanin, and he slept for 70 years. When he woke up, he saw that a person was picking the fruit off of this carob tree that had last he knew had just been planted. Amalei, Atu to Shatalte, are you the one who planted the tree? Amalei, no, Barbreyana, I'm his grandson. Amalei, Shmami Nadin, I'm Shibin Shnin. He said, look, it happened. I slept for 70 years. He saw that his donkey had given birth to like second and third generations. How was the donkey surviving during that time? Maybe, I don't know. There was grass. He was eating off the tree. No, that would only have been later. Anyway. Okay, so anyway, look, there was already, you saw two more generations. Same way, this man was his grandson. The donkey had grandchildren. He slept through two generations. He went to his house. Amalahu, he said to them, is Choni HaMe'agel son alive? Amulei Braylesa, his son is no longer alive. Bar Bray Isa, his grandson is alive. Amalahu, Ana Choni HaMe'agel, he said to the people in the house, I am Choni HaMe'agel. Lo he knew, they didn't believe him. So, okay, you don't like it at home, you go to work. So they didn't believe it, and they didn't believe him at home. He went to the base medrash. Ko kusha dahavilu rabbanan, any difficulty that the rabbis had, having mefarik lahu, he would answer it. Amar lahu, no, did I list? No, I skipped a line. Shaminu l'rabbanan, he heard the rabbi say, the kami, hearing shmaitatin kibishnei chonia me'agel. The learning we're doing now, it's so like it's so clear, it's so light, like it was when we would learn at the time of Choni HaMe'agel. The chiyavi ayah lebeis hamedrash, because whenever Choni HaMe'agel would come to the base medrash, chokusha dahavu l'rabbanan, any problem the rabbis would have, we'd answer them, and now everything is so clear. It wasn't clear if he was right now contributing to it, or just his very presence sort of brought that into the base medrash. So Amalu, he said to them, I am Choni HaMe'agel. They said, yeah, right. Well, he knew. They didn't believe him. They didn't give him the honor he desired, he demanded, or he deserved, excuse me. He grew despondent. He prayed, umis, and he died. He prayed to die, and he died. Amar Rava, says Rava, that's what people say. O chavrusa, o misusa. Either company, either companionship, or death. So he had nobody he could talk to. Nobody believed him. He was completely alone. So he chose death. Often that's used about the importance of having a chavrusa and learning, but that doesn't seem to be the point here. Now, what's the point of this story? One of the possible points here is, that Choni here, one thing that you see is that even the power of his words, right? He just said, you could have said it was like a Yonah story, like Yonah was sort of complaining to God, and God sort of shows him the whole, thing with the gourd and tries to teach him a lesson, but there's also some idea about I think, he says things and that they happen, right? He says this thing about 70 years and he sleeps for 70 years, it didn't sort of say God was doing it to him or whatever, and it says that he prayed to die and he died. So again, it's sort of going to the power of the words, and maybe if you're so powerful, you have to be a little bit careful, about what you're saying. The other thing I think that's interesting is that it obviously tames Choni. It almost makes him irrelevant. If you ask somebody, oh yeah, there was a story about this weird guy, he slept for 70 years. The end of the story is that he becomes completely irrelevant. He sleeps for 70 years and he becomes completely irrelevant. And, again, it might be one of the ways that the rabbis are sort of the end of his life wasn't a life of great honor. The end of his life was completely forgotten. He just disappeared from the scene. And again, maybe that's a way of dealing with somebody that had all this sort of charismatic power. And again, it's interesting that the Gemara emphasizes that when he prayed, it was because they didn't give him the honor that he deserved, right? Rabbi Yochanan recasts it as saying he didn't have companionship, but he only prayed after the base medrash. Now that was base medrash plus the house, but to me it's the bigger impact is that your family doesn't recognize you, right? So here it sort of emphasized that, and it also sort of brings him in an interesting way into the whole rabbinic discourse. You didn't normally imagine that Choni would ever go into a base medrash, and here you found that, oh yeah, when Choni would come into the base medrash. So I think these are interesting different ways here of a little bit, toning down his power, and the one sort of bringing him in, he's not this threat to the rabbis. He would walk into the base medrash or whatever, but he's also a tragedy. If you feel Bachoni was such a tragedy, then he loses the power, I think, of the previous story. But I don't really I think the other point of it, though, that's going to come up is the idea of the planting of the tree for the grandchildren, and what are you leaving for future generations? Because the next few stories are going to be stories about Choni's children, right? And the other issue that comes with somebody that has this type of charismatic power is, well, what good does that do for the next generation? What are you planting for the next generation? That's all very good for you. What are you leaving for the next generation? And I think that's part of the issue with Choni. Yes,
and he was a tragedy because he needed the recognition and adulation. That was the tragic.
Right.
He was still respected as Talmud Chacham in the Beis Medrash. He just wasn't Choni.
Right. Although, again, it's not clear that he was even respected yet. He came into the Beis Medrash and things all of a sudden it was all of a sudden things were working out in the Beis Medrash. Like, it wasn't even clear that he was directly participating in the discourse, right? It says he went into the Beis Medrash and they said that's what he used to. When in the past he used to come in and answer all the questions. It didn't say that he was right now doing that. He says when he went to, but it could be. It's a reasonable conclusion. But yes, I agree. I think that the point again is that he needed his status. Right, and here it is. And I think that's the point. He needed his status, and in the end, the story of the tree is, I think, the question of, it's not sort of about what you're doing right now. It's sort of what are you planting, to leave to the world behind in future generations, and not about the status that you have. And here, look, people of great status, they get forgotten. They pass from the world, and life goes on. Yeah.
Choni's understanding of the verse from Tehillim as in the past tense, that we were like dreamers. That my benchers, those are always translated as "we will be like that." We will be.
When God returns, because it was written. I mean, the question is when you think it was written. Was it written after? Because if you think that film was by David or finalized by David, then it couldn't have been written when they were returned. So it's like it's prophetic. Yeah. Okay. But anyway, it's the question about whether it's prophetic or whether it's in the past. Okay.
But it can't be referring to Mashiach. It's got to be referring to.
No, I guess it could be, but I think it seems to more simply be referring to, because that's why the 70 years, the coming back in time to second base and Mikdash. Okay. So two very powerful stories. Now we continue. Where are we? Okay, Abba Chalakia, Bar Brei Dechonia Ma'akel. So now we have the idea of two generations, grandchildren. So now we're going to get to see what were the seeds that Choni planted, and how did his grandchildren turn out? Okay, so he was Choni Ma'akel's grandchild. When the people needed rain, they sent to him, and he prayed to God. Now, the phrase "Bai Rachme" is just a conventional prayer, right? No magic, nothing special. We've learned, but fine. So he prayed to God. Vasi Mitra, and it rained. Okay. So again, seems to have some of the power of his father, but none of the drama. Okay. So once the world needed rain, so they sent a pair of rabbis to him, in order to ask for rain. The rain should come. Also, they went to his house. They didn't find him. Also, they went out to the field. They found him. Rafik, that he was hoeing. Yovile Shalma, they greeted him. Shalom Aleichem. Below Aspalu Ape, he didn't respond to them. Top of Chaf Gemon Bet. Bepanya in the evening, when he was bringing home like chips of wood, Darat Sivi Umara Bechara Katfa, he carried the wood chips and the hoe on one shoulder, Viglima Bechara Katfa, and the cloak on another shoulder. Kula Orcha Lo Siyam Asane, the whole way he didn't have his shoes on. Kimata Lamaya, when he got to the water, Siyam Asane, he put on his shoes, like we would normally do the opposite, right? Take off our shoes for the water, put them on for the road. Kimata Lihizmi Vihiki, when he came to thorns and thistles, Dalinu Lamane, he stripped his clothes. Kimata Lamasa, when he came to the city, Navka Devasayu Lape, his wife came to greet him. Kimikashta, when she was all dressed up with makeup and jewelry. Kimata Labese, when he came home, Alas Devasayu Beresha, first his wife walked in the door, Vahadar Ayali, when then he walked in, Vahadar Ayali Rabbanan, and then the rabbis followed him. Yosef Karchwif, he sat down and he broke bread. Rabbanan, to Karuchu, and he didn't say to the rabbis, come join me for bread. So everything he's doing seems completely bizarre. Palagrifta, he broke the bread. Lianuke for his children. Lakashisha Chada, Lizutra tray. To the older child, he gave one slice, and to the younger child, two, which is bizarre. You would think the opposite. The older one is bigger. And then he said to his wife, presumably in an aside, in an undertone, I know these rabbis have came because they need rain. Let's go up to the roof and pray to God. After the Martzi HaKadosh Baruch Hu, maybe God will be desirous of our prayers. V'yesi mitra, and He'll bring rain. V'lo nachzi tivusa l'nafshan, and therefore we won't have to take credit for it. They won't know. Let's go in private quickly and pray, and maybe God will listen, and then it won't even be due to us. It'll just rain, and they won't realize because we had prayed. Sakul li'igra, they went up to the roof. Kam iu b'chada zavisa, he stood in one corner, v'i b'chada zavisa, and she in another corner. This evokes the same image, of the rabbis have in the interpretation of Yitzchak, right? Which is Vayeta Yitzchak Lashem L'nochach Ishto, that his wife was in one corner and he was in the other corner. The end of that story is Vayeaser Lo Hashem. God responded to him. Let's see who God responds to here. Okay. Where are we? Where were we? Okay. Kam Saik Anani Mehach Zavisa Divasaihu. So and the clouds first lifted up from his wife's corner, which somehow was a symbol that his wife's prayers was accepted. Kinachis Amalu, when he came down, he said to them, Amayos Rabbanan, what brought you here? Amalei, Shadilan Rabbanan Lagabe Damali, Mi Bai Rachamei Amitra. We were sent by the rabbis to ask you for rain. And apparently it had already started raining because they had just snuck up to the roof and prayed. Amalahu, he said to them, praise God, you didn't need the services of Abba Chalakia. Look, it's already raining. So Amrulay, they said to him, yeah, that's not going to fly. We know that it was because of you. What do you think? We figured out what you were doing up there on the roof. Ella, and we'll see, maybe they even saw what happened. Tell us the things that we're astounded by. Why, when we greeted you, did you not return our greeting? I was a day laborer, hired by the day, and I thought that it would not be fair for me to take off from my work. It's not fair to the person who paid me, just to say hello to you back. My time Adar Martzivi why do you have the wood on one shoulder and your cloak on another shoulder when you walked home? Because I borrowed the cloak. I borrowed it for wearing. I didn't borrow it for presumably either means for wearing home, or I didn't borrow it to maybe wrap up. Maybe they were saying, why didn't you wrap up the wood in the talis to protect, So that's not what I borrowed it for. My time why did you not wear shoes except when you came to water? Because all the way as I'm walking, I can look down and see that I won't be stepping on a snake or a scorpion, and I won't see in the water, so I have to protect my feet. Of course, it doesn't explain why you didn't put it down on the road. The fact that he's not, notice he's a day laborer, he's borrowing a talis, so presumably he's exceptionally poor. So he doesn't want to wear out his shoes, seems to be the point. My time, why when you came to the thorns and thistles did you lift up your cloak? Because my skin, if it gets torn, will heal itself. The clothes, if they get torn, won't heal themselves. So again, clearly, it's actually not a bad point, which you do sometimes. People do that, You're getting to a place, you roll up your sleeves, you don't want them to get torn. But also, again, sort of shows how poor he was. My time, why when you came to the city outskirts of the village did your wife come all dressed up? Because so I should not go ahead and be looking at other women as I'm walking into the city to the house. So they obviously had some good communication between them that it wasn't something that he was choshed him about, that he didn't tell her, that's itself is like very interesting that was an arrangement that they had, that so they were obviously on the same wavelength. My time why did she go first and then you and then us? Because I don't know your character. I don't want you walking behind my wife. I don't know your character. My time, why did you not invite us to join you with bread? She says, Mishum dulo nefisha rifta, again indicating how poor he was. There's not a lot of bread. I don't want you to be grateful to me for nothing, that I offered you bread and then I offered you to join me and then there wasn't enough to give, but you'll be thankful that I offered. Better not to offer if I don't have what to give. My time Yav Marli Yanuka Kashisha Chada Rifta Velazutra Trey. Why do you give your older son one and your younger son two? Amalu Hai Kai Bevesa. The older one is at home. The Hai Yasi Beve Knisha. The other one goes to shul. He's out of the house the whole day, so he needs more for the whole day. My time Akadim Salik Anani Mehach Zavisa Dahavis Kamit Vasayu Demarla Anana Dide. Why did the clouds go up first from your wife's corner before yours? Why was she answered? Mishum Deita Tashchicha Bevesa, because my wife is in the house all the time. V'yayv Rifta La'aniya Umekarva Hanayasa, and she gives bread to the ani, which is something he benefits from immediately. Her merit is greater than mine. And I just give money, and it's not so immediate the benefit, and therefore her merit is greater. Inami or Hanu Bironi. Okay, the Havi Bishivivusan. Or how about another version is that there were these evil people in our neighborhood. Anabai Rachme, or powerful people. Anabai Rachme Dele Musu. I pray that they should die. Vibai Rachme de Lahadru B'Tiyufta, and she prays that they should be Choser B'Tshuva. Vahadru, and they were Choser B'Tshuva. Now, obviously, that's a great story, a lot to say. We're already over, but the one point I do want to make is notice the way he's different than his father. First of all, grandfather. First of all, his wife is answered. Besides that, he doesn't use magic. His wife is answered. He's not the one that's answered. That's a big one. He goes up with his wife. He doesn't think it's all about him, right? He asks his wife to come up with him, and he specifically does not want credit. He wants to do it in a way that it's not about him, and that he doesn't want any credit. Okay, and he's also somebody that is, again, in a very humble situation in life, and very sensitive to the reason, what you have to focus on is, it's sort of like it's more of a type of a rabbinic type of a concern, that all the details of the way you act are being done appropriately. You're not taking, you're not borrowing a talis, if you didn't ask permission to borrow it. You're not stealing the labor that that you're being paid for, and so on. And that the reason that somebody is answered is because of their good deeds, not because of some charismatic power, some special, inexplicable power. Right? The reason his wife is answered is because of the way that she acts. So it's really taking the grandson of Choni Magel and putting him into a sort of a classic type of a system that the rabbis recognize. And what I would sort of say in terms of that in the previous story is, and that's also what can be passed down to future generations. That's sort of the problem about a charismatic leader. He has to be institutionalized, because you can't follow in the model of somebody that has this unique power that is not something that can be transferred. So with the story of the carrot tree and what gets left over 2 generations over, after your original actions. So what can be and what was transferred is a type of way of being righteous and praying to God, that is not based on that charismatic power. So that's what ultimately was the enduring legacy, is the way it got transferred to his grandchildren. And we'll see tomorrow another story of a grandchild.
Tony gets no credit for producing this offspring.
What?
Tony gets no credit for producing this offspring.
Well, it said Bar Bray, the Choni Magel. It said his grandson.